Okay, we're now live.
Yeah. Right, members, welcome to this meeting, 19th of January, Children and Young People Scrutiny Board. We'll do the agenda. When I can find it. Substitutes nominated for this meeting.
Yes, we've got Councillor Kingston substituting for Councillor Courtney.
Local Councillor Kingston, welcome. Members' interests. I will remind members they need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests they may have on items on this agenda now or at the appropriate time. There were none. Sorry, there were none. Is that right? Good. Admission of the public. It's not recommended that this meeting be excluded. The public be excluded from this meeting, and we are live on YouTube. Important, as I always mention, to remember that. Minutes of the meeting held on the 1st of December. Any comments, members? Again, there were not. Can I have a proposer and a seconder? You'll have to shout because my screen doesn't give all the pictures.
You've got Councillor Tremaine and Councillor Monteith, Chair.
Thank you very much, both. Just one thing before we go on to the actual meeting. Councillor Courtney is now the Deputy Portfolio Holder, Cabinet Member for Children and Young People, and as such is attending this meeting. Is she here? She's not. Yes, she is. In that role, rather than as a member of Scrutiny. You can't be a member of Scrutiny and a Cabinet Member. That's, as Sarah said, it's poacher and gamekeeper. So, and Councillor Kingston has generously offered to stand in for her. In the unlikely, as members know that Sarah is Deputy Chair of this board, in the unlikely event that, well, the likely event that I can't get through or I'm poorly or my internet connection don't work, we therefore need a Deputy Chair to stand in. And Councillor Foster has volunteered to do that for the remainder of the municipal year. It's an unofficial arrangement. We won't be taking it to council, but I'm sure members won't mind. If members do mind, now's the time to say. Okay, I'll take that as I know then. So, item 5, temporary accommodation for families in Calderdale. Who's leading on this? Heidi?
Yes, good afternoon, Councillor. Good evening, councillors. Thank you very much for inviting us along today. I don't intend to spend a huge amount of time, you will be pleased to know, on the presentation itself, but I hope it's contained some useful information for you. I'm also here this evening with my colleagues, Nicola Kaiser-Forrest, who's our Homelessness Services Manager, and Dan Wilson, who is our Temporary Accommodation and Support Service Manager. So I'll just bring up the presentation. Just bear with me. Can people see that?
Not yet. Oh yeah, can do now.
Super. I'm not going to be able to see you all. So Chair, could I ask if anybody does have questions as we go through, please do let me know and I will try and respond to those. But I'm happy to take questions at the end of the presentation.
My members are notoriously shy early on, Heidi, so we'll wait until you finish before we ask questions.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. Thank you.
I'm sorry, before we start, there are one or two new members here. If you want to ask a question, put it in chat. We will, and then I'll collate them at this end and we'll ask them at the end. So just say, I want to ask a question, or can I have a question, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Off you go, Heidi. Sorry for that.
Thank you, Councillor. No, that's absolutely fine. So on the first slide, I've just included some of the main reasons people become homeless, but we get a whole range of different circumstances that would lead somebody to becoming homeless. But our focus is always on trying to prevent homelessness where at all possible. But often there are times when this simply isn't safe for somebody to remain in their home, and we need to move them. But we do a lot of work around homelessness prevention, and we're very successful in doing that. So it's only those that we really can't help that need to move into temporary accommodation that we support in that service. So the type of temporary accommodation that's available for families in Calderdale is Ryburn House, which is our homelessness scheme that we have in Halifax. We have a women's refuge that we call the Acorns, and that's based in Calderdale. We have a number of what we refer to as dispersed properties. So these are properties that are scattered across the borough. And this allows us for people who it may not be suitable for them to live in a particular area. We try and ensure that there's accommodation across the borough that's available. It might also be if children are going to a particular school, if somebody has support networks or school in Todmorden, it isn't always ideal for them to live in Halifax. So we do our best to try and ensure there's accommodation available across the borough. And then where we're not able to provide immediate temporary accommodation in one of those options, we would use bed and breakfast accommodation, but that is absolutely a last resort, particularly for anyone that has children. We would always try and ensure that somebody spends a very limited time in bed and breakfast accommodation if they have children, and move them on into alternate accommodation as quickly as possible. All of the accommodation mentioned here is managed by my service, the housing service, apart from bed and breakfast, and it is all self-contained. This chart just shows the breakdown between different types of household, and you can see that our biggest population are single people, but we do still have a significant number of households who have children that we work with. So as of December last year, this is the breakdown of where families were living and the numbers of families, and the breakdown between preschool age and school-aged children. You can see that a significant number of families do go to our refuge. This is where obviously they've had to flee domestic abuse, and we can provide some specialist support. Sometimes we will place our families outside of Calderdale if it's not safe for them to be here. And likewise, we will accommodate families from outside of Calderdale if it's not safe for them to remain in their area. But the significant proportion of people who live at our refuge are from Calderdale. You'll see there that the average length of stay for families in temporary accommodation is just about 45 days. This is because we work really hard to try and find a permanent home for our families who are living in temporary accommodation. We recognise that a permanent home is a much more a better way to provide support and stability within that household. But we do find that our families at the refuge stay for a much longer period of time, up to 3 to 6 months. And this is really because we need to do a lot of work with them. They've been through an incredibly traumatic experience often, and we do a lot of work with that family to support both mum and the children during the time with us, and we ensure that we don't move people on before they're ready to have their own home. So this is a picture of our Ryburn House service, but across our whole service, whether it's Ryburn or the refuge or bed and breakfast or a dispersed unit, each family will always have a support worker. At the refuge, we have a specialist children's support worker, and they will work with both mum and the children whilst they're there. And we work alongside a huge range of different services, and the ones that I've listed there are just a small number of the different partners that we will work with, because it's always really important to recognise and understand what has led to somebody becoming homeless in the first place, and ensure that we support them with that particular issue. So if they've got into debt, we'll work with them around those financial issues, work with agencies such as, for example, the Citizens Advice Service, to support them with ensuring they're getting all the benefits that they're entitled to, etc. So really important that we have that partnership approach to working with our families. One of the reasons for this presentation today was that we were approached by a councillor asking us about standards in temporary accommodation, and that's why there are some photographs of the different kinds of accommodation we have, so that you can see for yourselves the standards that we have within our temporary accommodation. So this is one of our apartments at Ryburn House. You'll see that they have their own bathroom, their own kitchen. This is a bed sit, so the bed and living area are combined, but we have bed sits, 1 bedroom, 2, 3, and then 3 bedroomed apartments. One of the apartments at Ryburn House has fully disabled access, so that if somebody is a wheelchair user, they are able to access that property, and we can support them with their needs whilst they're with us. So things like adjustable kitchen units and so on are available in that property. This is the bed and breakfast accommodation. Some of our bed and breakfast accommodation is in Calderdale, but some of it is in Kirklees. And for us, that is not ideal. We do not want to be moving Calderdale families or any Calderdale person outside of Calderdale. But unfortunately, we don't have enough bed and breakfast providers in Calderdale able to work with us to be able to support everyone that we have in temporary accommodation in Calderdale. We'll come on to the fact that that's something we want to work on over the next year. Again, this is just bed and breakfast facilities, so that you can see the standards that they have. We'll move on to the acorns. So you can see this was taken at Christmas time with the decorations there. This is one of the apartments. It had somebody living in it, so that's why there's prams, etc. around. But again, all self-contained. This is a newer building than Ryburn House, so the standards are that bit nicer, in that the walls are very freshly painted, etc. But even at Ryburn, where it's a bit older, we do have CAFM and corporate assets and facilities management colleagues coming regularly to maintain the standards within the property. And you can see we also have some outside space at the Acorns, and we have the same at Ryburn, with some place areas for children to be able to play in. There's also, I'm not going to play it tonight because I'm always aware that IT can fail and let you down. But if anyone is interested in looking a little bit more at the service available at our Women's Refuge, there is a video link there that you can watch. It's only about 10 minutes, but it gives you a feel for the work that they do at the refuge. And then I wanted to finish really with some of what the residents think, because it's all well and good me telling you we have a great service, we do a lot to support families, but actually it's about what do the residents that use that service think about it. And so I've included some of the comments that our residents have made. And the one that I'd really like to just mention particularly is this one, because I think it really sums up what it is like to move from your own home into temporary accommodation. This lady had to leave her last home. She had to leave everything inside of it. And it was a really very traumatic experience. And her children had gone through a lot of trauma as well. And she sort of says there that the workers at the Acorns saved her. And now she loves being able to walk into her own home and feel that there's peace and happiness there. And I think that's a really wonderful thing, that that lady has been able to find that peace and happiness, and that her children have also found that and are able to move on in a successful way. So I've provided those thoughts. They're not all positive. I didn't want to just whitewash things. I think this particular resident was very clear that they really did not enjoy being at a bed and breakfast service. It was one of the accommodations we have in Huddersfield, and they found it very difficult. And I think that's why looking at how we deliver our service moving forward and how we respond to the bed and breakfast issue is really important. So I'm just going to talk through those ambitions for the coming year. Looking at bed and breakfast, reducing it wherever possible. Pre-pandemic, we would rarely have anybody in bed and breakfast, and it was almost unknown to have a family in bed and breakfast. We want to get back to that position, but the demand on the service is still quite significant. Therefore, we want to try and identify more bed and breakfast accommodation in Calderdale for when we do need to use it. As you see, eliminating all use of bed and breakfast it is really important as far as families are concerned. I feel that we do have good standards with it across our accommodation offer, but we need to maintain that and make sure we continue to provide a place that people feel safe. I've always said that I would always be prepared to live at the Acorns or Ryburn House or one of the dispersed flats, because if I'm not prepared to say I'd live there, how can I expect anybody else to say that they have to live there? So that's really important to maintain those standards. We also want to do some work around improving the children's playroom at the Acorns. That's something that is a real opportunity. And finally, extending support for those who are fleeing domestic abuse. So looking at some of the issues that were mentioned in the resident comments was around support when they move on from temporary accommodation. And so we're looking at how we can deliver that enhanced service moving forwards. So I'll stop sharing my screen and I'm happy to take any questions. Sorry, it was a quick whiz through, but I thought it was more important that people had time to ask questions. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Heidi. I've got a list. Councillor Kingston would like to ask you a question. Anne.
Thank you. It was just to ask what kind of properties the dispersed properties are. Are these houses or flats or a mix of them?
It's generally either large flats or masonettes that we have. And they're leased, just so that you're aware, they're leased from Together Housing. So all of our dispersed units are Together Housing properties.
Thank you.
Danielle, Councillor Dowens.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thank you for that report. I have a couple of questions. I hope that's okay, Chair.
Go for it.
So the first one, I'll just quickly get this one out of the way. You'd referenced about an accessibility for somebody who may have physical needs. But in one of the comments, it had referenced that one of the young people was visually impaired. And I just wondered if that was considered and obviously adaptations were made as and when was needed proactively, depending on need really that's delivered at that point. And then throughout the report, the terminology was heavily kind of assumed within the mums that are experiencing domestic violence. I do understand it's only 2% of single dads, but my first question is, it's a women's refuge, so that will disregard them from there. So then I wanted to know if the options are limited for male carers who are victims of domestic abuse, and if they are, a lot of the comments found that their time within the shared kind of areas, the Acorns and Ryburn House, the support was invaluable whilst in there. And I wonder if that's a bit of a gap, if depending what the housing is for male carers, male family members. And again, just that overall understanding of I know it's 2%, but how many is 2%? Because there's still a 2% that's affected. But yeah, is that okay? Thank you.
No, they're really good questions. Thank you for those. If I may respond, Chair. Firstly, in terms of accessibility and that particular individual, we would always look at a family's needs, whether that's a visual impairment, whether it's a hearing disability. We always look at any of the needs that a family may have, and we'll support them around that. So we will contact specialist organisations to bring in support and provide that where it's needed. So absolutely, we would do that. We do a support plan with our residents. We try to focus on the positives. You know, sometimes it's about what do you need, what are your problems. We try and turn that around a bit actually and talk about what are the positives that you bring, what are the things that you're really good at, you know, that where are your strengths. But we do also look at those needs, and we'll make sure that we work with the right organisations to provide the right support. You're absolutely right in terms of it is a women's refuge, and I think it's absolutely important that we have that dedicated female service. But we do get male victims of domestic abuse and their children, and in those circumstances we would look at what other accommodation we have. So that would be a dispersed unit or Ryburn House, and provide them with support there, and we would link them in again to specialist services. So there are specialist male services that can support a survivor of domestic abuse with their needs. So one of the things we are looking at though is how do we deliver our services in a more effective way, and we've been working with colleagues from Julie's team in Children and Young People Service through the Domestic Abuse Partnership to look at how we build on what we have. And one of those things is around how do we support male survivors of domestic. We're very aware of, we do provide support, but I always believe you can improve and do better. So we want to look at that offer and make sure they're receiving the same level of support as somebody who's at the women's refuge.
Thank you.
Does that answer the questions?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Sheila? Sorry, are you done, Danielle? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, no worries. Sheila, I'm coming to you, Doc, and Felicity.
Thank you, Heidi, for that report. My question really sort of is about sort of situations where circumstances mean that homeless folk, especially those with children, have to be accommodated outside of Calderdale. I know in the report it said that if somebody didn't like to be outside, but I can understand there might be reasons. And if so, what happens there? How long do Calderdale support somebody in another area? Is it a managed move? How, you know, sort of, how soon are they passed on to the receiving authority for support and things like that?
That's fine, Sheila, thank you. I'm going to ask Nicola to respond to that because this is an area of particular interest to Nicola. So I'll ask Nicola to respond.
So if somebody was placed in, say, for example, Kirklees, they would be allocated a support worker from Calderdale Temporary Accommodation Team, and we would support that person until they're rehoused. We would normally place in Kirklees like a bed and breakfast, but then as soon as a dispersed unit or a place came up at Ryburn House, we would be moving them back into Calderdale because we want to be able to support them with their pathway into alternative accommodation in Calderdale. We do get occasionally where people don't want to stay in Calderdale, and that's because of safety reasons or risk reasons, and so then we would do a referral through the homelessness legislation. We do a referral to the relevant local authority and work together with that local authority for them to take on the duty and to find the accommodation.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Foster, Dot.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, thank you so much for this report, Heidi. And thank you and Nicola very much indeed for showing me around Ryburn House and the Acorns last week. It was my email following a Newsnight report that showed quite horrific accommodation being used to support families who are homeless that prompted kind of the visit to the Acorns and Ryburn House and this report coming to the CYP. So I'm immensely grateful, not only for the report, but to learn that we don't have anything. Even the B&B is nothing like what I saw on a Newsnight report. It was probably a bit before Christmas, I think. So it probably won't be on iPlayer any longer, but it was pretty grim. I mean, it was more than grim. So it's immensely reassuring. The standard of accommodation that we have here is much, much more, well, it's fit to live in, because quite frankly, that wasn't at all what was on Newsnight. So yes, thank you very much for that. And thank you for your diligence on this matter, because it's really important. You know, families, no family is going to make themselves homeless by choice, unless they're in a situation where they don't have any other choice. And to know that there is safe and secure accommodation for them to go to, and they will be supported throughout that is really, really valuable. You know, it's very reassuring. I just wish there weren't so many families and single people in the position where they are homeless in the first place. And I guess that's the next step, isn't it? Working out why people end up in that situation and what we can do to support them, to stop them becoming homeless in the first place, and so on. So I don't know if you want to expand a little on that, Heidi, but yeah, thank you very much for all your attention to this. Thank you.
Do you want to expand, Heidi, or are you happy?
All I will say is there are varied reasons why families become homeless, and it's why it's so important that we do that preventative work. And we do a lot of really good prevention around homelessness. But Councillor Foster's absolutely right, understanding those reasons that are leading people into homelessness, and working with other agencies to try and address that is so important. And that's why, you know, homelessness isn't just about putting a roof over somebody's head. It's always much broader than that. The putting the roof over the head is actually the easy part of it. It's all the other wraparound things that people need to support them that's the big challenge. So no, and it was really good that Councillor Foster was able to come along to our services and look at them and be able to tell you that what I'm saying to you this evening is actually correct. It isn't me sort of glossing over. We really do care about the accommodation that our residents live in. It's their home whilst they are there, even though it's a temporary home. And so the standards are really very important. Thank you.
Before I felicitate, I'm surprised there isn't an independent inspection regime.
No, there isn't. There isn't a sort of, not like, for example, CQC would be in care homes. There are standards, though, around building standards and those kinds of things that we have to adhere to. So, for example, one of the big issues of recent years has been around fire safety. So that is something that we have to adhere to. But no, there aren't any particular inspection regimes around homelessness.
Very interesting. Councillor, is it felicity?
Hi, my question is just a little bit, there's a couple of bits to it. The first one is around capacity, because obviously you gave us a snapshot in the presentation of where we were in December, and that gives us a capacity of, say, 28 units. Is that what we have 28 units essentially? Okay, so what is our maximum capacity that these places will hold? Okay, so we have 23 units of accommodation
at Ryburn House, 21 units at the Acorns, so that's 44 if my maths is correct. And then we have about 14 or 15, I'm getting nods from my colleagues, 14 or 15 dispersed properties as well. But that is for singles and families. So, you know, at the Acorns, for example, we do have accommodation that is either bedsit or 1-bedroom accommodation where it's a single person. But our overall provision is probably around 60, if my numbers are correct.
So that's why you've got a family in a bed and breakfast, because your family provision was overrun.
That's right. I mean, we don't have and I really need to emphasise, families going into bed and breakfast is very rare. It's just when so what might happen is we get a family today that come in and they're immediately homeless, and we just don't have anything other than bed and breakfast available tonight. We'll put them in a bed and breakfast tonight. But first thing tomorrow, Danielle from our service, Dan Wilson, will be looking at who she can move around, what we can do to find a way to move that family as soon as possible out of bed and breakfast into one of our main services. It might be a referral to either the refuge in Calderdale or elsewhere. It might be looking at what we can do at Ryburn House, but our absolute priority would be to minimise the amount of time that family spend in bed and breakfast.
That situation has just happened this evening. Yeah. So I had a placement for a family at 4:30. So because I don't have anything, they've had to go into B&B in Kirklees, but it will be for one night. And then the refuge are going to complete their assessment, and with the hope of them going there tomorrow. So we do what we can to get them out ASAP, whether it's moving around people that are currently in our family flats, if we can, whatever way we do it, we've got to get them out of that bed and breakfast as a matter of urgency. It's rare it happens.
I suppose my second question is then, because obviously you've talked about how your B&B provision has increased, which is obviously what nobody wants, because nobody wants to put anybody in a B&B if they can avoid it. I was just wondering, sort of what is the cost of putting somebody in a B&B, and is there, if we know that this is likely to be increasing with the cost of living going up to 5.4%, there is going to be an increase in homelessness issue. I just wondered if there was a long-term plan in terms of investing in more dispersed properties, because obviously there is a massive cost associated with putting families in B&Bs.
Absolutely. It's a really difficult balancing act, councillor, around the numbers that we have. We did take on additional properties during the pandemic from Together Housing. But what we did was, rather than keep those as temporary accommodation, we turned them into permanent tenancies for the individuals that lived there. It was much better for them to remain where they were living if they were happy there, which we checked they were happy. But it was about saying, rather than moving them on, let's keep them. The problem is we don't want to take on too many dispersed properties, because it's quite a lengthy process getting a property set up and ready, because we furnish them and so on. So there's a cost associated to that, to have them sat empty. Mm-hmm. And so we just try and get the balance right. But because of and also one of the big issues is we don't want to, if we take a property from Together to become temporary accommodation, it takes away a property that could become somebody's permanent home. So it's difficult, but it is one of the things that we'll be looking at in terms of moving forward and looking at how we reduce that reliance on bed and breakfast. So it's a really fair comment to make.
And then just my very last one, which is really quick. You obviously said that we can sometimes house people from Kirklees in the refuge. And I just wondered with you, if that generates income, and then if that income is then reinvested in this service. Like, you obviously want to improve the children's area in the refuge and that sort of thing. So how is that income generated sort of reinvested?
So we don't get income as such, and it's not just from Kirklees. We will get referrals from across the country. So we've had people from Cornwall, from Brighton, from Scotland. We'll get referrals from across the country, but we do the same. So we will have to sort of ask an authority to take on responsibility for one of our families that can't remain safely in Calderdale. So but when somebody comes in, they will apply for benefits the same as any council, any Calderdale resident would. So the income is the same as anybody else. So our income is through, usually, if people are on benefits, it's through the housing benefit element of whatever benefits that they're on that will pay for our service. So we don't generate a profit as such, but what we do is work with colleagues from corporate assets, facilities and management to look at how they spend their money and ensure we can invest it in the right places. But we can also bid for funding as well. And we have been very successful in working with colleagues from the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, as it's now called, to bring in additional funding for our services. So that's the way that we'll be looking at what we can do to improve.
Is it comparable then? Where we help to house what as input help that we ask for?
It is. Yeah, we pretty much have found the sort of imports and exports, if you like, balance each other out. I think previously the service, the refuge, was run by an external provider, and at that time it was probably certainly 50-50 in terms of Calderdale residents and non-Calderdale residents. It might have even been a bit more in terms of those external placements. We have changed that, and I would say, and I'll need Nicola to either nod or shake her head, I think it's probably about 80% Calderdale residents and 20% external placements. But that's really, those external placements are really important because it means we can do our external placements reciprocate, if you like.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Rivion, Helen.
Thank you very much, Chair. I hope I'm not repeating something that's already been said, because I know it's a bit late. A couple of slightly different things. One is about a provision for people as they leave the refuge, or in terms of the housing provision that is made. And it's something I picked up from casework, is sometimes people do seem to have moved out and they're struggling with things like essential furniture, white goods, emergency food, and certainly social enterprise and charities in my own ward have often ended up picking that up. Now, it's often responded very well, but I did wonder what the sort of planned move would be in terms of ensuring people did have the essentials as they moved out.
Yeah, Danielle, would you like to answer this? I know it was in relation to the women's refuge, but actually our offer at the refuge and temporary accommodation is the same.
Yeah, that applies to both. Yeah. My particular instance was of the refuge, but yes, it would apply to both.
Yeah, so as Heidi mentioned, everybody that comes into temporary accommodation or the refuge are allocated a support worker. So it's part of their role to ensure that the move on works and they've got everything they need in order to sustain that tenancy. So that includes the essential items of furniture. So we apply to the council welfare assistance team for those essential items, which is usually your white goods, your bed, your bedding. But we also work with other charities to try and secure additional goods, such as Project Colt in Elland, we often use, and then Smart Move. So in terms of sustaining the tenancy when they move on from temporary accommodation, if it's identified that that's something that they're going to need, then the support workers would put in a referral to other agencies for that tenancy support. So when they move on and our support almost pulls away, the other agencies will pick up that support and ensure that they're managing, that the tenancy is set up and that they're going to sustain it and not risk becoming homeless again, either due to utilities, budgeting, finances, generally just managing the home. So that would be our role, to ensure that that happens and it's in place before anybody leaves temporary accommodation.
But I mean, seem to be some instances where either that hasn't worked or people have fallen through the cracks.
Yeah, we do experience that at times for whatever reason, and it could be due to non-engagement. So we might secure an external support agency to support families or singles, and they'll pick up that support. But if they then pull away and don't engage with that service, that's when it can tend to go wrong. And that there are people that come into temporary accommodation more than once for reasons similar to that. But it's just about making sure we keep that communication with our external agencies that we're frequently using to make sure that that support remains in place, and hopefully that they set that tenancy up and they engage and get to a point where they can manage the tenancy independently.
And if I might, Chair, just a different point. I know this is something I always raise, and I think probably do this better, and that is where there's no recourse to public funds. I know your funding comes from housing benefit. So what happens to people fleeing domestic violence who have no recourse to public funds?
Nicola, would you like to answer that one?
Yeah, so we have a protocol in place that will support somebody who's got no recourse to public funds to access accommodation whilst they look at their immigration status, and that is we support them with applying for their DV concession, which enables them to access public funds. So we have a protocol in place. We work with our colleagues in children's and adults respectively to support somebody who's fleeing domestic abuse who hasn't got no recourse.
So it wouldn't be an instance of people asking about someone's immigration status before they got a place in the refuge?
No, I mean, it's
I know it
part of
happened
our-
elsewhere. I'm not sure it
Yeah.
happened. I hope it hasn't happened in Calderdale, but I know it
No,
hasn't.
certainly we gather the information, and sometimes it's unclear, but we'd always, offer accommodation whilst we work that out with that individual and then get them the right legal advice.
Right. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Helen. There's nobody else asking. I have two really quick things. One, improve the children's play at the Acorns. This has already been touched on. I mean, what sort of money are we talking about? And have we budgeted for it? And why are we doing
So
it?
the improvements, sorry, the improvements we're talking about are not actually necessarily physical improvements. At the moment, the play area has a huge amount of things in there, lots of different things on the walls, in lots of drawers on tables, and it needs decluttering. It's for children that have been through a very traumatic experience. Having too much stimulation is a bad thing. So one of the things that we want to do is to remove a lot of the clutter that is in there and look at how we make it a space that is sort of peaceful and calming rather than traumatizing, which I think it is at the moment. So the improvements aren't necessarily about doing building work or anything like that. The space itself is fine. We've got a sensory room that was funded externally that is a really great resource, but we just need to look at getting rid of some of the clutter that's built up over the years and start delivering our service in what's called a trauma-informed way, so that we're not re-traumatizing the children and young people that we work with.
So if it's not about funding, what is it about?
It's about having the time. We've been through COVID under a huge amount of pressure. We've needed the space for other things, to store residents' goods and things like that. So it's just about finding the time and the staffing resource to be able to provide the space that's needed. It's a time thing more than anything else, and a prioritisation of the work that we have at the refuge.
That's for volunteers. People are getting the paper. How come we haven't give a hand? Anyway, next.
With it being a refuge, we have to be very careful about maintaining safety and security. So we've got to be very careful about who comes into the building.
All right, okay, understood. Finally, on this, do we have a policy as to what happens? We spent a lot about women's refuge and men, but we haven't mentioned the transgender issue here. Do we have a policy around that?
It's something that we have had conversations with legal services about. It's something that what we would do with any individual who needs our support, we would look at it on an individual basis. As we would any applicant, we will look at the individual's needs and make a judgment as to where the right place is for that person. It may be in the refuge, it may be elsewhere. And it's about balancing providing a safe space for women against ensuring that we are supporting those who identify as female. So it's something that we do have some guidance on. It hasn't been an issue we've had to address yet, but what we've said is that we have a very open policy and we'll look at individuals on a case-by-case basis.
All right, thank you. All right, members, there's nothing further. I'm going to say thank you to Heidi, Dan and Nicola, and move on. An excellent report, very interesting, and members were engaged, so that's fine. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.
Thank you for your time. Bye-bye. Interesting. All right, members. Item 6. I would describe it as a substantive report, but I'm still sure all members have read it. Julie.
Thanks very much, Councillor Roadstrick. Good evening, members. It's Julie Jenkins, Director of Children and People Services. I'm joined by a number of colleagues this evening, which are the 3 key statutory partners who are responsible for safeguarding in Calderdale and for bringing the partnership together. So I'll just let my colleagues introduce themselves to you. Shall I start with you, Penny?
Good evening, everybody. My name's Penny Woodhead. I'm the Chief Quality and Nursing Officer for Calderdale Clinical Commissioning Group.
Thanks very much, Penny. Mick from the police. You're on mute, I think. I'm not sure.
No, you just.
No, we can't hear you. It's Superintendent Mick Brown, who you've met before. He's been here to talk about the front door arrangements. So Mick's here on behalf of Chief Superintendent Sarah Baker this evening. He's clearly having a bit of a problem with the sound. So I'll just bring other people in as well. Julia?
Yeah, Julia Caldwell. I manage the Safeguarding Children Partnership for Calderdale and the Safeguarding Adult Board.
Lovely, thanks, Julia. Is Louise here for this item as well? And Louise?
Louise was here. Sorry, Julie. Louise, I'd invited her to observe. I don't think she thought she'd get a starting role. But if there are any questions of some of the detail around health, I'm sure she'll be able to help me out. Louise, go on, introduce yourself.
Hi everybody, I'm Louise Fletcher. I'm the designated nurse for safeguarding children looked after and care leavers from Calderdale CCG.
Lovely, thanks very much. Should we try Mick again just before we get into the report?
Good evening all, can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah, Mick, we got you now.
Sorry, I've had to switch from my hard drive to my laptop, so I know I'm looking at the wrong camera at the moment. So my apologies. Yes, good evening. Thank you all for letting me be here today. My name is Mick Brown, Superintendent of Operations at the Police at Calderdale, representing Chief Superintendent Sarah Baker.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Mick.
You look better in profile, Mick.
Very kind of you say so.
We're not going to go through the detail of the report. As you know, it's an incredibly long report. It's an annual assurance report for yourselves, and you do have an additional report this evening on education. I can see from the chat already, Chair, that there are people ready with questions, and to make best use of time, I suggest we go straight to questions.
I think that's absolutely right. It's a huge report. Took a bit of reading, and then took a bit of reading the second time. So it looks like Councillor Kingston's got quite a few questions. Obviously, if members don't put the questions in, I've got hundreds. So, Councillor Kingston to start with.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've annotated it. I'm just going to go through in order of what I've got in my annotations, if that's okay. So my very first thing in the introduction was, it uses the word incredible. It describes some of the incredible work that has been undertaken, which implies excellence in my phraseology. So I wondered what was incredible, what was excellent, what do you feel qualifies that statement? That's my first question. Do you want me to?
We'll pause there. I had exactly the same question.
Thank you.
The first line in the report.
Yeah.
Why are you incredible?
I think delivering safeguarding services in the last year, but particularly the last 18 months since COVID, has been challenging for any part of children's services. Clearly, a lot of the health professionals were pulled immediately into the COVID response, and we had to make sure with full national lockdowns that we had eyes on all of our children, particularly vulnerable children and children who may not have been attending education at the time. I think you'll remember that vulnerable children were exempted and should have had a place and did have places at school. But particularly for children with special educational needs, the parents were extremely worried about them attending school and catching COVID. And we had to put an immediate system into place to make sure that right across the partnership, we had eyes and relationships with those families and children, and nobody was left at risk at all. The staff at the front line were key workers, as you'll remember. They were also exempt from working at home and were coming into the office. And immediately we had to source PPE, protective equipment for people with masks and gloves and visors to go out and do that front end door knocking, seeing families, visiting children, making sure we were seeing people face to face. That obvious at some personal risk to themselves. And you know, the pandemic at the time, if you remember, nobody really knew what the risk from COVID was. We knew that, you know, the rate of illness and hospitalizations was increasing, and we were being asked to take all of the safety and precaution measures. But I don't think you can underestimate what schools and children's services staff and health staff did through that incredible period. And in fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, Councillor Raystrick, I did get an email from Councillor Raystrick, the day we locked down and everybody went home, saying, Julie, now is the time. If there ever was a time, now is the time for children's services to make sure they're there and our children are safe, and said he had every confidence in us being able to do that. So I do think it's been an incredible effort. I do think it's taken its toll on our staff who did have to go home, some of them, and work from home. They go out and do some incredibly challenging work, weren't coming back to the office and having a lot of support. We've got workers back in the office now, which is great. We've got our pod reflects back on the go for our social workers to be able to get together and reflect on their practice. But I do think it was an incredible effort from the police, from the voluntary sector, from every single part of Calderdale that really do care about our families, that we were there and we were delivering and making sure, you know, that our children were safe. I'm quite happy for any of the partners to chip in, but that's my view of what was pretty incredible.
Can I just make another comment there, Julie, if that's all right? So I think Julie's talked really about that sort of responsive piece going into the lockdown and the pandemic, and how colleagues across the partnership have kept the focus truly on children and young people. But we've done development work as well, and I think the report's peppered with examples of things that we've been able to continue to do despite all of the additional asks in relation and you know, stresses and strains in relation to the pandemic. So there are a number of different examples that are in the report, which I would describe as the development things that we've been able to continue with, as well as doing more in relation to assurance.
Thank you very much. Next up, the about capacity. This, I think this is for you, Penny Woodhead, because this is sorry, Penny. Page 41. It says every NHS funded organisation needs to ensure that sufficient capacity is in place. Because I'm on the AHSC scrutiny panel as well, I've seen numbers about the amount of people that each GP is catering for. And I know that in Calderdale, the ratio of patients to GP is particularly poor on the national level compared to other areas in the country. And I just wondered, do you feel that there was sufficient capacity in place? I'm particularly aware that people have had lots of difficulty accessing GPs through the pandemic, and I was concerned that because of that, are there children that have been missed? How much potential is there that children have been missed because GPs have been unable to see people in person for a significant period?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Kingston, for that question. I think just by way of clarification, the piece that's in the paper around ensuring specific capacity relates to safeguarding expertise in health services rather than the workforce in its broadest sense. So we've a duty to make sure that we've got certain roles in terms of that expertise that then support frontline staff in discharging their safeguarding duties. How that pertains to general practices, that we have safeguarding leads in each of our GP practices that work with a named doctor that we employ as a CCG to ensure that we've got that two-way communication, learning lessons, being able to share best practice. So that's the sort of context from the report. If I then turn to your question, which is, what's the capacity like? Have we missed people? We've done assurance pieces through the period of the pandemic and continue to do so in relation to prioritisation, particularly for children and young people. And we've had that level of assurance. So yes, you will see variability in terms of access into general practice, triage arrangements, early doors, lots of things that turned to remote consultations, but we've been working with general practice to really increase that very quick triage, and then that face-to-face where it is the most, most appropriate, particularly for our very young children.
Thank you very much.
Can I just come in there as well, Councillor Kingston? Just we obviously can't talk to everybody in Calderdale, but where we do get opportunity, we do test it out. So reviews give us an opportunity to look at practice, and we've done a number of reviews through the COVID period and continuing now with a look back at that period, and haven't found an issue with access to GPs as being any of the issue in the review. So as I say, we can't ask every single person, but what we can do, and we do get opportunity to look at that through reviews, we have done. And I can assure you that just this morning I've been talking about the very much heightened use of GPs through COVID period.
Thank you very much. And then there was this Superintendent Brown. I was looking at the section from the police. You said you've been able to take real strides to address concerns and got clear lines of sight around referrals, actions and outcomes. That there are less children committing crime, less children in need of protection, and an increase in liaison and diversity action. And I just wondered where the evidence is for those statements. What are the statistics? I couldn't see any statistics or any evidence supporting those statements.
Yeah, which one would you like me to address first? I'm happy to go through them.
Particularly less children in need of protection. Where's your evidence that there are less children in need of protection?
We record systems in respect of those crimes that are committed by children and against children. We also record systems in respect of how we deal with early intervention, and the idea is that we're trying to get those youngsters into early intervention processes to try and make sure that they are appropriately protected. You're never going to be in a position where you can truly say that you've got all children safeguarded, but what we are seeing is less children coming through onto the referral processes, which means that we're as confident that we can be that we are getting those children and the right children into those diversionary pathways. It's a very difficult one because you never know what you don't know, and we always have to recognise that. But what we are seeing is that the early intervention commitment that as a district that Calderdale are undertaking as a collective, and also West Yorkshire Police are undertaking, is that we're trying to get in early with troubled families, with youngsters that require that help, support and diversionary tactics to try and make sure that we can make a real difference into the lives of young people.
Just further on that then, because you said about less referrals, and I noted on page 48, I don't think this is part of your section though, that it was noted that 71% of cases, further contacts and referrals to CSC were made after the step down of intervention, meaning that there was still apparent risks to families following step down. So I'm wondering, is that decrease in referrals actually a consequence of the pandemic rather than a consequence of a reduction in the number of children needing protection? So is it like an apparent reduction in the number of children needing protection rather than an actual reduction of children needing protection?
Yeah, Councillor, it's always possible. I've been around too long to ever make such sweeping statements. The reality is we have seen crime drop as a result, and some of that crime drop has been some of the excellent work undertaken, but some of it undoubtedly is a result of the pandemic and the fact that people are in houses, and we can't, I mean, what we do see is we have seen a rise in some other crime types as people being at home. So I think the true reflection will be when society opens up moving forward this coming year, and then we can make direct comparisons pre-pandemic to what we're faced with now. But we do recognise that when we are trying to highlight what we're dealing with, we always try and caveat the current situation. We have been in a little bit of an unusual period for all of us. All I can say is that we have seen crime drop. We did expect to see crime drastically increase, and we're not seeing that drastic increase. In fact, Calderdale have got some really excellent crime figures across the board, and on a real plus point that we maintain some real positives in respect of our outcome rate. So the people that are brought to justice for committing those offences remains the best in West Yorkshire. So yeah, I think the fair points that you certainly make, and we are alive to it.
I think, Councillor Kingston, I just interrupt there. That entire question ties into something that this board has been working on or thinking about all year, really, and it's highlighted on page 50. Right in the middle, the data during this time showed a slight increase of contacts to children's social care. Julie knows the rest of that sentence off by heart. And that's all tied around early intervention. Superintendent Mike Brown just touched on that. I wonder if Julie would care to add to that response from Mike.
Sorry, Councillor Rose, you're directing that at me.
Yes, Julie, sorry.
Okay, no worries. I thought you were. Sorry, it just went a little bit.
Children need child protection numbers. We talked about it before going down.
Yeah.
We say that's the benefit of early intervention. Superintendent Brown, can I call you Mike? Mike?
Yeah, please do. Most folk call me Mick.
Oh, Mick, sorry. Okay,
yeah,
well,
it's no problem at all.
I think Mick just said that it's not apparent of the epidemic. It's an actual policy that we're trying to work out on early intervention. Would you back up that statement, or would there be another reason? We've asked this question before.
We have, yeah. We brought, we bring regular reports to you on caseloads and workflow and how many children in need, child protection looked after cases we've got, etc. And last scrutiny, unfortunately you weren't here, Councillor Kingston, but we did have quite a long detailed report around the early help arrangements and the hub that we've put into place. We've got two things. There's the front door to children's services, the multi-agency screening team MAST, but we've got two things that are bolted onto MAST before. If it doesn't meet the threshold for a children's social care, social work intervention, there are two things. We've got the early help hub. You had quite a long detailed report on that last time. That's again multi-agency, and as Mick said, is trying to to get in there much earlier stage. Have a look at what the presenting issue is, but what's really going on for the whole family, not actually what's coming through on on the paper, actually getting behind what's going on with the family dynamics and trying to address that. And the other thing we've got is an early action team that's really got a lot of police officers in, which are trying to divert young people away from crime. So less work coming into the youth justice end of the service as well. And I think overall we've seen a very kind of steady decline with children in need and children with child protection plans, our looked after figures have stayed stable, which is again bucking the national trend where looked after figures have risen quite significantly. So have the other categories. But I think with the early help hub arrangements, we were showing you evidence of the impact of that, of actually when people get an early help assessment and some support at that earlier stage, that they're not coming back through then into children's social care. So I think we've got good partnership arrangements, you know, right around the front door and working closely with schools as well as the police.
Can I just come in on that as well? Because that's one of the things. So Julie obviously looks at all of that data and what that means. You do at Scrutiny. I'm sure we as a partnership, so that multi-agency partnership will be focusing on what the early help hub particularly, but more generally what early help and what that looks like in Calderdale and how effective it is and what are the outcomes more importantly. So we as a partnership will be looking more closely at that in the coming year.
And you got a really good answer to that question. Could I move on to somebody else, please? And then if you've got more questions, I'll come back to you. Diana, Councillor Tremaine.
Yeah, a couple of comments first. Just coming back to the bit about the first question about how you'd kind of coped and it being excellent in the circumstances. I wanted just to say that I thought the section on learning and improvement was really helpful there, and I got a sense of it, you know, with kind of professional background, I guess, in terms of learning and stuff, that it was being still proactive rather than reactive in this crisis, which I think is a really important point to raise. So I thought that was just a really strong point in the report. I'm going on to I was looking at the education section, the later part. I was, again, really pleased to see the section about trauma-informed approaches and that being a key area for development. And that's something I'd be really interested in the future to sort of just see a bit more on how that's going and what's progressing there. And then just a question in the section before 4.1, which was looking at the different schools, colleges, the different organisations and how they all report together and work together. I was really interested to see the bit about the college there and how that seems perhaps slightly separate in some ways from the other schools, for example. Obviously, it is run in a slightly different way, and just how a lot of their input was pastoral input from within the college, which I can relate to, having worked there myself. I can see how that would be the case possibly. So I'm just interested in what the kind of plan is in terms of sharing good practice, because there will be good practice to share from that, but also making sure that everyone else is aware of the different situations and how there might be overlaps there. So that was my question, really.
Can I come in, please, on that? Just to respond, Councillor Tremaine, at the moment and all the way through the pandemic, we've been having a weekly meeting with the college, the secondary schools, the primary schools and early years representatives as well. And that meeting has covered, obviously, keeping students and staff safe from COVID, but it's also covered many other issues. For example, everyone's invited, which is a big issue for the college and for the secondary schools as well, which is around the sexual harassment that first came to light in some private educational establishments in London. And then there was the ripple effect all the way through, with many young people coming forward saying, do you know what, that's happened to me. So it's been a good forum, the Safe Education meeting. And this morning, that meeting took place, it's on a Wednesday morning. And I was at that meeting with Leslie Bowyer, the Assistant Director for Education, and with Rob Murray, the Assistant Director for Children's Social Care. And the college was there as well, because we were talking through that kind of communication, what's happening in each of the settings. And listening to the college, Councillor Tremaine, what they're saying is, you know, they've got 16 and 17-year-olds there. They're not adults, and we do pay a lot of attention. And I think the child protection system has really refocused onto that top end of adolescence and risk and what young people are doing, and some of those risks from using drugs or alcohol, going missing, from exploitation and trafficking. So I just wanted to assure you they're very much part of the partnership. We do get feedback from them and obviously from the whole of the education setting at that meeting on a weekly basis. But this morning, for example, we were just talking through the pathways and how we interface with the college as well as the secondary schools and primaries around child protection work and referrals, etc. So yeah, just to assure you they're very much part of the picture.
That's really reassuring. Can I just a really quick question? Is it easier in some ways to build those partnerships more strongly, having done a lot of it virtually since the pandemic, or is that actually become better, do you think?
Do you know what it has? Now you're asking, just the ability of me to be able to jump on that meeting every week and hear directly from the heads. Not all of them are there, it's representatives, of course. It's worth its weight in gold. And when you're having that interface with the Department for Education, with the UK Health Agency as well, about what's happening in real time in Calderdale, to try and do it physically before just wouldn't have happened. So it's a great way of making sure you know what's happening at the moment. I think Penny'd like to come in as well.
Yeah, so coming with a health sector lens, just thinking about the education sector and the colleges, we had a development session, Councillor Tremaine, with our broader partnership at the end of September, early October, having a look at key areas of success and areas for development for the coming year, how the partnership was working, and we had a number of breakout sessions. But everybody that got in the conversation with the lead professional from the college came away with, wow, there's some fantastic work going on there in that that we wouldn't normally see in the safeguarding space, and let's understand much more about what's going on and share that learning. So I think, to a man, we all just took that away and thought, wow, there's some great stuff going on, let's build on it, let's understand it better, because it's not something that we've captured particularly before in that sort of early intervention prevention space.
That's really good, thank you. And it's just, good to see that interchange of good practice, sharing good practice. Thank you very much.
Councillor Durrance, Danielle.
Thanks, Chair. You have covered a lot. I think one of my comments really was around like the I'm trying to think of how to get it out of my head here and into make it more understanding. I think what I'm asking is, when we look at we've now gone on to 2 years now, understandably we haven't had a lack of involvement totally for 2 years, but towards those older groups who maybe we expect the management is a bit easier if they don't have SEND or they don't have other challenges, how have we got any understanding of if there are more of the families that if they would have had a regular interaction with schools? So, there's a lot about the groups that, the vulnerable groups that met the criteria in order to continue. I'm wondering if there's a new criteria that we wouldn't usually have seen prior to COVID. So there's a new pattern of need, I guess, that, because we've had that bit of a softer touch, and I don't mean that derogatory because I understand what I mean, but wouldn't necessarily need that constant interaction because they didn't used to meet the criteria that have now ended up needing further support with these intervention panels. And if now those relationships have started to be built back up, if it's been recognised in further crisis than we would have usually. I don't even know if that made sense, so I'm sorry. It's kind of a spaghetti way of saying, taking away the groups that we kind of recognise, usually with higher needs, are we recognising a new group because of the expectation to self-manage some of their education, because of what we would see with their ages, where quite academically able, they've not really ticked any typical boxes before, and I'm wondering if we're seeing a pattern where some of those are falling into crisis when they wouldn't necessarily usually, because I've noticed on the report where we would expect the patterns to be. Is there a new pattern?
Can I come on this, please, Councillor Raystrick? I think that's a really good. I think it's a really good question, Councillor Durrance, and I think we're really just starting to see the impact of COVID long term on young people. It would be good if Pranitha's there. I know she is on the call from the Youth Parliament, just to hear from Pranitha as well on this. when I've finished, just saying a couple of things. I think the first thing is around the levels of anxiety for young people. I think that's a big change even for young children since COVID. They're worried and they're anxious, and they are verbalizing it in that way. Before, they wouldn't have said it. You might have seen it, but they're actually saying it. And I think schools are doing an awful lot around emotional well-being for our young people. And I just wanted to give you an example from the meeting this morning around one of our secondary schools. I won't say which school it is, but what they said is, we've got a lot of pastoral staff. We've got non-teaching assistants, and we've got heads of year who don't have any classes to teach. So they have got that individual time to spend with young people that they are worried about or who are worrying. And what they were talking to us about is sometimes you might be curious about what's going on in the family, but sometimes you get a gut reaction and you're worried, more worried than you would be. And that's what we were talking about this morning, about making sure that because our schools know our young people well, that when they do get that gut feeling, and it probably is a new cohort of maybe young people who wouldn't have been worried about before, that they know where to go and they will come to MAST and they will ask us to have a look at that with them together. I think the other thing that we need to tighten up on is a growing number of young people, and we've talked about this before as well at Scrutiny, who are being electively home educated, and making sure, I think you'll see in the education report that we've tabled this evening, that as a board, well, a safeguarding partnership, we did write to the government to say, actually, in terms of our powers as a council to intervene or to take too many steps into that kind of private arena, if you like, within a family home, it is limited. We can check on the education and curriculum, we do meet with parents and we do see children, but ultimately we haven't got a lot of power. So I do think that is a growing cohort, children with special educational needs and other children without special educational needs who are being educated at home. So I think you're right. I think we're starting to identify potential vulnerable cohorts. We're working really closely with the schools on that, and we'll continue to do so. But I think you're spot on with your question. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I tend to agree. The elective home education session, all I've written next to it is big issue. There's a lot of work there to do. Praneeth has not really come forward, so I'm not going to embarrass her. Councillor Yvonne Helen.
Very briefly, actually, because Julie's actually answered a lot of what I was going to ask, but certainly anecdotally, my experience as colleges but in schools as well, mental health needs of young people returning to school after COVID has been identified as the biggest challenge. I don't know whether that's backed up by statistics yet, but certainly that's what a lot of people are telling us. I suppose the next question is if we've got capacity to meet that increased need in services that were probably stretched before.
I don't know, is Penny still here? Yeah, you are, Penny.
I am, yeah.
I don't know if you want to comment on the CAMS position at all, or.
So I think you've probably received reports before, haven't you, in relation to the whole set of work that's going on around children and young people's emotional health and well-being, and that sort of spectrum of work from the sort of the really supportive early intervention right through to when people are in extreme crisis. I think it's too early to tell in terms of the numbers across that across the spectrum at this stage, and it certainly, I don't believe it's translating into specific safeguarding activity, but we are really interested from a partnership about what's going on, and undoubtedly we're going to need to think creatively about where our resource is. And think in relation to more investment in that particular area. So we do know that there are challenges for those children and young people that require hospital, really specialist support. It's not unique to Calderdale. It's not unique to West Yorkshire or even the north. It's a national issue, and we are working really closely about looking at, well, what are the possibilities, and we've seen the opening of the dedicated inpatient beds in Leeds over this last few weeks. I think 22 new beds that have come online for people that are the most vulnerable, children that are the most vulnerable. But there is more work to do, and I think partnership in terms of that, the safeguarding partnership, working really closely with colleagues in the Open Mind partnerships. We need to keep that going as we could. What did Mick say earlier on? As society opens up, I think that there's more for us to do, certainly.
Councillor Kingston, Dana. Anne, sorry.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just to comment on the question from Councillor Riveron about mental health of young people. To say that I think that's evident even in the report, where it tells us that self-harm amongst young people had increased by 48%. Surely that's an indicator. Thank you. That's it.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Interesting. I have one or two really quite quick questions you'll be pleased to know. Page 54, the partnership has agreed a new approach. This will be reflected in the new Children's Safeguarding Practice Review framework. What is this and when will it be ready? And is it ready now or?
Julia, do you want to cover that?
I'm just checking whether it is on the website, but after the meeting, I will send you the link to where it is, Councillor Raystrick. Yeah, so it's the framework. So if you remember the terminology, what used to be called serious case reviews are now called child safeguarding practice reviews. It came out of working together to safeguard children, and it's the new process under which we operate in Calderdale, and we have it published on our website. I'll send you the link, and actually it's been held up as good practice, so we've had colleagues from Leeds asking for the framework for it to be shared with them, because it's been deemed as best practice for some areas.
All right, Julia, thank you. Send it to Lauren and she'll distribute it to everyone. All right. Page 55, something that mental health services practitioners reported some confusion. We noted this in our the time before last when Open Minds came to see us. I was sort of hoping that had been sorted out.
Yes.
Do we think we have?
So this was in relation to some interviews actually done with some specific members of staff. And yeah, lots of work is ongoing around the pathways and the single point of access for mental health. I'm not sure Penny might want to come in on this, but lots of work is ongoing and does continue to go on to communicate effectively how professionals can use those services and referring, etc.
It's something that I think we've got an Open Minds meeting on February. I might just raise that the confusion element. Anyway, and now Julia knows what I'm going to ask about now, because I ask about it every single year. And the last time I asked about it, I was accused of, well, I wasn't accused. It was implied that I was culturally insensitive. I'm going to talk about page 56, priority 3, consanguinity. I'd like to know what the sentence "to provide information which can be understood by families in order that they can make informed choices" actually means.
Ben might want to come in on this if Ben's on the call, but this is an aim and priority for the Child Death Overview panel across Kirklees, Calderdale and Wakefield. And so the aim is obviously to provide information which can be understood. Lots of work goes on currently with regarding genetics, conversations with health professionals, both before pregnancy and after pregnancies, genetic counselling, but this is a step further really in our aim to engage with the community. And Ben, do you want to come in on this one?
Thanks, Julia. You have raised it previously, and we've said we will certainly bring back our progress on it. And I think last time we discussed it, progress had halted because of everything that's been going on. There has always been an intention on our part to develop a West Yorkshire approach to this. So we've got consistency across the patch, and we've progressed to some extent in that we've started meeting as a group to work out what the right thing to do is. I wasn't able to attend that first meeting, so I can't tell you what happened at it, but I can say that work is at last is underway to establish what our processes will be to reduce child deaths from consanguinity in the future where we can, and reduce the impact that obviously causes to our communities. So if it's okay, rather than getting into the long debate, Chair, if it's okay, I'd like to be able to bring it back when I've got more to tell you, rather than just, oh, we've had a meeting and we haven't sorted it out yet. I'd rather come back and have a proper conversation with you when we've got something to share that actually brings to life a bit some of the language that's used in the report that you've read.
Well, when do you think that would be, Ben?
Well, about 2 years ago, in reality, is when we'd anticipated doing this. I think over the course of the next 6 months, we should be in a clearer position of being able to bring something back. So, if you wanted to call something in later on in the next year, then in the next council year, then I think, look, let's aim to do that, and I'll continue to push it at West Yorkshire level. I think it's on a personal level, I'm not happy or comfortable that we haven't sorted this out and haven't got a clear approach in place. So I'm pushing to get it sorted at a regional level as well. So I understand completely where you're coming from, and it does need to be a lot clearer than it currently is within Calderdale and within West Yorkshire as a whole, I think.
Well, there are 2 points I'd like to make, Ben. One, there's an election before that time scale, and you're saying, and obviously who knows what the electorate will decide, and I'm up for election this time. But secondly, I don't want. I've done quite a lot of reading on this, and it's not really. I'm always delicate here. I don't want this to be forgotten because people are scared of being considered to be racist. That's the honest truth. And I think there's a bit of, I don't want accusation to be held against anyone, nor do I want children to die because people are scared of saying it. The highest proportion of child deaths in the states of America is in Arkansas, where first cousin marriage is not illegal, rather like this country. It's a question of geography, not culture. Remote hill villages like Arkansas, we've all seen the film Deliverance. That's where it's infuriating that children are dying because people are pussyfooting around an issue that they shouldn't be. I've said my piece. I'm not going to go into modifier factors. I was going to do, but I'm not. I just can't bring myself to do it. I'm so angry about it. Councillor Foster. Dot.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to ask about, you've got 2 priorities. It's on the same page as Chair's just been talking about. You've got 2 priorities, both related to smoking. What percentage of mothers are you finding are smoking when you're looking in this particular demographic? And how has the loss of the Stop Smoking service impacted what you're able to do to support women and families to stop smoking?
So off the top of my head right now, can't give you a percentage, only in that the reason it's a priority is that a high number of the modifiable factors that have been found in the child deaths are could be the fact that mum or dad or someone in the house smokes. So that's the reason it's on there as a priority, in that smoking is classed as a modifiable factor. There could be other modifiable factors in that single child death or in those child deaths, but smoking is present in a lot of them. the impact on the smoking cessation. I know that a lot of work still goes on around smoking cessation in children's centres and from our health colleagues. So I won't be able to give you a figure on exactly what the impact has been, but maybe we can look at when that was removed and whether the modifiable factors around smoking has increased at that same time. Maybe we could do that for you.
No, you finished?
Yeah, Ben's got his hand up.
Ben, sorry.
Yeah, just to add to what Julia said, I think smoking cessation services are still going, have been undertaking the usual work throughout the pandemic and continue to work pretty closely with midwifery services. What we've seen, we've been doing some work with midwifery services to increase the number of referrals into the Stop Smoking service. And in the first 3 quarters of this financial year, we'd seen more referrals in than the previous financial year in total. So we're seeing a greater uptake, and we are seeing a slight fall in the number of or the proportion of women who are still smoking at time of delivery, which is our key metric really, because we want pregnant mums to be giving up before they're pregnant ideally, but during pregnancy as early as possible. So we're starting to see an impact on the work we're doing. It's ongoing. It's an ongoing challenge, as you can imagine. But it's an area of focus for us in our work across the system with midwifery services and health visitors and the Stop Smoking service working together quite closely on all of that.
Thank you.
Anything else further? While we're on that section, Ben, I've written a lot of notes about the sudden unexpected death in infants, deprivation, etc., etc. Safe sleeping materials. Is there a fund available to supply parents with safe sleeping materials? I used to work for a company that I wasn't involved in that part of it, but used to make infant mattresses and that kind of thing. And there was a lot of speculation at that time around what caused, what do they call it, SIDS in those days. Is there a fund? Do we supply it as part of our benefit system, or could a parent, if you can identify it, that you've got a profile of the kind of things where this happens, do we throw a bit of money at them and buy them a mattress and a cot and the proper equipment that goes with it? Do we do that?
There's a number of schemes available to families to provide them with that level of support. It's not just about what's available in terms of the equipment, it's about the home environment and the sleeping arrangements within that. So when we review child deaths, we will see, they'll have all the right stuff in the house, but it'll be due to co-sleeping with baby in the same bed as the parents and things like that occur. So we do a lot of work with a lot of the services that work with families with young children and babies do a lot of work with parents and to try and get across this message that actually, the risk of sleeping with your baby in the same bed, you can see in the report the consequences that can bring. So we'd spend a lot of time across the system trying to develop consistent messages on that. Again, there's ongoing work around updating that to ensure that every service is giving the same sort of message rather than perhaps mixed messages, which may have been what's happened in the past, because it isn't quite as simple as you think it would be, really, in terms of some of the messages that come out from some of the national organisations. So again, it's part of the work plan. There is work going on, multi-agency partnership work going on to ensure that we've got consistent messages and consistent advice to parents, along with signposting towards getting the equipment that you've talked about there, Chair.
All right, thank you, Ben. Councillor Riven, Helen.
Yeah, just a bit, perhaps part of an answer to your question is, I know in Scotland, all new mothers are sent a baby box, which includes like a cot and a mattress that can be placed by the parent's bed. And I think it's based from memory on a scheme, one of the Scandinavian countries, which have the lowest instance of sudden infant deaths. That happens in Scotland. I don't think anything like that is planned in England, but maybe something of that national initiative is something that we need, and maybe we could lobby for.
It's a really interesting comment, and we have considered that at a previous CDOP and looked at the evidence base and considered whether it was something that we'd wish to do in Calderdale. Actually, when you look at the evidence base, it's not great actually. So there's lots of media interest in, and this must work, mustn't it? Because we're giving it out. But actually, in terms of the impact it has on things like child deaths, it doesn't have that impact. When we went through it, had the discussion with all the professionals at CDOP and reviewed all the evidence, I think the consensus was that it's something that wouldn't be an effective intervention, even though it kind of at first glance looks like it's quite a sensible thing to do.
Ben's right, and it's the circumstances sometimes rather than having a cot and a mattress and a bed. And Louise Fletcher has led the work around safe sleeping, because this is an issue everywhere actually, but she's led for West Yorkshire, and soon will be pushing and launching a new kind of promotion to other professionals, not just health professionals, to all professionals across the sector, about this issue and about what it means, what safe sleeping is, and what to be looking out for.
Louise, care to comment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're launching a campaign. It's called the Safe Sleep Campaign. It's going to be launched on the 7th of March. It's going to be launched from a West Yorkshire area, so that everybody gets the same messages, but each area, as in Calderdale, Wakefield and Kirklees, can take the information that's provided and use the resource and look at how they're going to use the initiative. I've already had pre-meetings before in December with children's social care housing, women's centre, early years, and I've got really good buy-in that we really want to use this resource going forward. So what the proposal is a risk minimisation tool that professionals can use to aid them to identify what the risks are within that family setting. And there will also be a parent-facing tool so that practitioners, whoever is involved with that family, can go through the risks that, for example, drinking alcohol, bringing your baby down through the night when you're sleep deprived and sitting on the settee, and the potentials of falling asleep, and really looking at some harder hitting messages to really truly get the message across as to what the risks may pose. So that will be launched on the 7th of March, along with the multi-agency guidance and some multi-agency training that's going to be open to police, children's social care going forward. So I shall be able to give you an update once that launch has been taken forward. But from a Calderdale perspective, the buy-in's been really good. We've got links in each area, people who are going to take this safe sleep work forward. So I can provide you with an update once that's being launched.
Please, via Lauren, if you don't mind, Louise. I'm interested in hard-hitting messages. We could do some hard-hitting messages in other areas, as previously mentioned. One or two other quick things before we come to an end here. Page in my notes, but there was a report produced. Oh, sorry, Kenisa wants to talk to me, does she? Oh, there's another. About health equalities for out-of-area children. Did we ever see that report? Page 42. An audit on looked after children in Calderdale placed from out of area to review the impact on the use of health services in Calderdale and to establish any gaps in provision. Did we ever see that report?
So that was a report that was conducted by the member of the CCG along with the Children Looked After Health team. So that report's just been completed and it's been shared within the partnership. I can present it at the next corporate parenting panel if that would be of use, and the work that we're taking forward, because there's still lots of meetings around how we progress with the work and we're looking at conducting a multi-agency audit. So I'm happy to come and present that there if that's the correct place.
I can't decide what goes to corporate parenting because I don't chair that. I can decide what comes here though.
Councillor Wilkinson's here this evening, isn't he? And Councillor Courtney, who will be chairing corporate parenting panel. It'd be good to take a view from them, because usually we would take specific reports in relation to looked after children to corporate parenting panel.
Sarah, comment,
Yeah.
please.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. We've got an agenda setting meeting
tomorrow.
Very soon. Tomorrow, in fact, yeah. So we could bring it up then.
Yeah, that'd be
definitely. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So we're bringing it to corporate parenting, Louise.
I'll present it there.
I'm sure you're happy you volunteered. Okay, that's good. It's a much softer environment than this. I'm coming to the end now.
What are you trying to say about my chairing, Chair?
I'm sorry, Adam, I missed that.
Just about it being a softer
Oh,
environment.
right, okay, I've got you. Friendlier, shall we say. The youth council, is it the youth council or whatever? I've got a note here about it. That we asked to advise on things. I can't find a place of the notes. Here we go. Community assurance, young advisors. How many of them are looked after children?
I wouldn't tell you because of the low numbers. So we do try and recruit people who've had experience of all sorts of different issues, actually.
Lived experience, Julia. Lived experience.
There you go.
Are any of them looked after children? After children, care leavers?
No, what we do is the young advisors actually, as you can see in the report, go to their colleagues within the pupils within the schools and try and get the broadest surveys from across their different school patches.
So no, then, is the answer to the question.
Again, I can find out, but again, I might not be able to tell you because of the low numbers of them.
I don't like that. You might not be able to tell me.
I might be able to in private, Colin.
Yeah, I'm not.
Would it be helpful?
I don't agree with that at all. But anyway, it doesn't matter.
Would it be helpful if we dropped? Would it be helpful if we dropped scrutiny a briefing note on the representation within the young advisors group? I think it'd be an interesting thing. You'd probably want to know, you know, not identity, you know, as Julia said, in small numbers, but you know, in terms of their lived, you know, the lived experience and the kind of, which
just to put our minds at rest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
We try and obviously the group is. Sorry.
No, go on. You're in a hole, so you stop digging.
The group is obviously to work on behalf of the partnership actually. When it comes to young people with lived experience, obviously, we rely on the partner agencies to provide us with those views, feedback from children, from families, from parents, and similarly through our audit work, etc., or deep dives. But so there are other ways that we obviously try and seek the views and feedback and hope and ensure that they're helping to shape services from young people with lived experience. Yeah.
Okay. I could ask if any of them were home educated, for instance, as well. We have 400 young people home educated in this last time I heard. It's interesting. I'd like to know the breakdown. Members, if there's nothing further, I'm going to bring this to a halt. Most of the things, I think we gave it a good look going over tonight. I was very impressed with this report. I've written down various columns. Very good, impressive, especially the say incredible because it's already been said. But It's very good. I'm particularly impressed with the partnership working out. Mick and Penny and Julie take great credit for that, I think, and Julia for coordinating it all. So I'm going to say thank you and good night. Really, an excellent report. It's one of the highlights of my year is a children's safeguarding report because I get to go on about one of my pet subjects. But nevertheless, very good. So thank you for attending. Thank you for your time, Mick. Penny's gone, but and Julia. Thanks, Penny.
Yeah. Night, Julia. Night, Mick. Night, Louise.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thanks, Mick. Well, that was a long one, members, but report really fascinating. Good work being done. Ben, Happy New Year.
And to you, Chair.
I'll stop saying that tomorrow because it's my birthday. So I say Happy New Year up until my birthday.
Okay. So first of all, apologies for not providing you with a written report. As you can imagine, it's been a bit frenetic in the public health world. Just when you think things are starting to calm down, another variant comes along and throws everything into disarray again. So I'm going to do a verbal update. I'll talk a little bit about COVID and a little bit about some of the other public health priorities for the year ahead, if that's okay. But we can't not start with talking about the current COVID position. So it's not gone away. You might not believe that from the media, but it's not gone away. At this point in time, we've got over 120 outbreaks in children's settings. So that's education and in early year settings. And consequently, as a public health team, we're spending a lot of time supporting settings with taking the actions that they need to take to respond to that, as you can imagine. I think we continue to work very closely with schools and we continue to work very closely with heads to understand what we can do to support them. And I think that's a relationship that continues to be really strong. It's been reflected in the way we've developed local measures over the last since half term, really, last term, really, and continued into this term, which go over and above some of the national measures that have been in place because it's been the right thing to do for Calderdale, and it's because it's been the things that heads say will make a difference to them to be able to keep as many children in school as possible, which is ultimately what we all want to see. So that work goes on, and at this point in time, it's pretty busy in terms of the COVID response, and I'd expect it to wax and wane a bit over the coming months, but I don't think we've seen the back of it yet. That said, we still continue to work very closely with our colleagues in Julie's team around the recovery from the pandemic. From a public health perspective, it's really important to recognise the impact that the disruption to education and to early years provision over the last 2 years has had on the development of children and young people and their future opportunities. From a public health perspective, one of the key drivers of future life success is the education you get, the ability to be able to get a good education and then use that to get a good job, good career, and lead the life you want to live. And we've got some work to do to catch up. We've talked about that at previous scrutiny panels. I think from a public health perspective, particularly, it's the work around any kind of picking up of issues that are going to impact on the ability for children to recover their education. So are there any underpinning health issues that we need to be able to address and get in and sort out? So again, focus on that recovery. We, outside of the COVID world, are particularly focused on the new health and wellbeing strategy, and within that, the starting well and developing well bit of the strategy. So, starting well up to school, from pre-pregnancy up to school, really, and the work that we've previously done through peer reviews and the work we've done with the Early Intervention Foundation to develop our Calderdale Early Years strategy, which is very much a partnership approach, and you've heard about that here previously. But as a public health team and our commission services, clearly there's a big role for them to play in that, particularly health visiting as that universal service who has contact with almost every child in Calderdale. So a lot of work going on about how we can align some of our the different bits of the system and work much closer together in partnership with shared objectives, really focused on ensuring that children are ready to learn when they come to school, and also actually looking to really address some of the gaps that appear quite early in childhood in terms of I suppose health inequalities really. So why are some children ready to learn when they come to school and others aren't, and what are we doing about that, and how do we ensure that we're meeting the needs of all children within Calderdale at the appropriate time? So lots of work for the public health team on that, and it feels really important that in terms of the future of these children as they move into the school age. And then beyond that, within the school age up to about the age of 25, how do we ensure that the health and well-being of the children and young people who live in Calderdale is maximised so that they can really get the most out of their lives in terms of their education and their wider social and I suppose a kind of friendship and all of that side of things really, to again move into adulthood in as healthy way as possible, and as successfully as possible as well. So again, lots of joining up of work. We've really done quite a lot of work around joining up the school nursing service with the mental health services to ensure that we're really looking at what the needs of the children are, and some of the needs that maybe are causing the mental health issues are being addressed rather than just focusing on the mental health issues. And that's really important, getting to the root cause of problems. We talked about trauma-informed practice earlier, and it ties into some of that actually as well, really trying to get to understand what's going on in children's lives and helping them to get over some difficult moments that they may have been through. And I think, we were all kids once, and I'm sure there were all times that perhaps that we had some traumatic experiences in childhood. I certainly did, and it's helping to ensure that those children have people who can support them effectively within the system. So those are really, that's our kind of key work program. It's very much a program of integrating the public health world with the rest of the system to ensure that we're all trying to achieve the same outcomes, and the right person is available to those children and young people who need support, rather than children and young people being bounced around the system or having to tell their story many times, and so ensuring that we can, I suppose, act more rapidly. We talked about early intervention from a public health perspective. Clearly there's the prevention bit in there as well, stopping stuff happening in the first place, but intervening early when it does happen is really important, and that's where we fit into the system really. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of our ambition for the next year. It's I suppose, to sum up, it's an ambition for Calderdale, not an ambition for public health. It's how can public health contribute to what we're trying to achieve in Calderdale, and how can we ensure that the bits of the system that fall under our remit are working very closely with other bits of the system. So we are talking about the child at the centre, with Calderdale as a system around meeting the needs of that child, rather than individual services doing X, Y, and Z. And that's really part of a much broader strategic intent led by Julie and Debs, really, I have to say. But I think it's something that we're really bought into. So I'm going to stop there, I think. The only other thing I suppose I should mention is the ongoing work with the Scrutiny panel around food in schools, and that's something that there's a working group looking at, which public health are part of, along with Leslie and others within Julie's team, and that's an interesting piece of work that will develop over the coming year, I think, as well.
All right, thanks, Ben. I would think that one of the challenges for public health going forward is the work that you've been doing in the last 2 years around COVID, helping the schools, all that kind of thing. if we had to believe the predictions, and who would, that this is going to taper off and we can concentrate on what is going to be our real job, really, and managing that transition from being tied up all the time COVID-wise to not being tied up all the time COVID-wise is the biggest challenge that you face, I think. Would you agree?
Yes, to some extent, certainly on a personal level, I'd agree. I think it's really important to note, though, that the services, the frontline services, the health visitors, the school nurses have still been doing the same job and have still been out there supporting children and young people throughout the pandemic. It's been a different sort of environment to work in, but they've still been effectively doing the same role. I think, yeah, from my perspective, I've tried to still keep on with some of the stuff that we've been doing, and Julie knows I've been contributing along the way where I can. I think there's others in my team who've really stepped up as well, and I think whilst I may have been spending all my time doing COVID, other people have stepped up and taken on some of the responsibility that perhaps I was doing, and that stands us in good stead. Actually, we've got people who are now much more embedded within the system, working much more closely with partners outside of public health rather than just looking inward. And I think you look at all the bad things that have come out of the pandemic, there's been some really good things as well. That partnership working and the upskilling of some of our more junior staff, I think, stands us in really good stead actually going forward. So I think the transition should be easier in that respect, in that it's not like we're starting from nothing. We've got people who are already doing this work, and it's just building on that and bringing that extra capacity in to help move things forward even quicker than we're doing, actually.
Thanks, Ben. Councillor Kingston. Anne.
Thank you, Chair. Just some very specific questions about the impact of COVID on children's health. I wondered, do we have any stats for children in Calderdale that have got what's called long COVID? Do we know how many children are affected by that have got long-term health problems as a consequence of having had COVID? I've not heard anything. I know that there are children that have died nationally. Have we had children in Calderdale die from COVID? And I suppose that also about ventilation in schools. I understand that that's quite an issue, that there's lots of requests from education unions for increased ventilation in schools. Is there anything happening about that in Calderdale?
First of all, in terms of child deaths, we've not seen any child deaths from COVID in Calderdale at this point in time. I think for which we can all be very grateful. The number of deaths nationally actually has been very, very low in children and young people, and those that have happened have almost entirely been in children with quite severe underlying health conditions. I'm not saying that's good. I'm just saying it's a relatively low risk for a child if they catch COVID of ending up in hospital, and it's an even lower risk, very minuscule risk of dying of COVID. So that's really positive. I think in terms of the numbers of children who've got long COVID, the jury's still out. We don't have the evidence at this point in time, certainly at a Calderdale level. We've done some modelling around it. And I'll be happy to share that via Lauren if that would be helpful to members of the panel, just so that they know the work that we've been doing on long COVID and specifically anything that we've done around children. So if that would be helpful, I'm more than happy to share that for circulation, and you can come back to me with any questions if you wish as a result of having seen that. But it's quite hard to estimate, partly because it's very hard to know. Children are catching COVID all the time, so it's quite hard to know, firstly, how many are going to go on and get long COVID, and how long that's going to last for, and what those symptoms are. So, long COVID could be still having a cough 3 months later, or it could be quite debilitating, not being able to get out of bed. It's quite a broad range of potential quite a broad range of potential things that you could have going on as part of that long COVID definition. I think what is really important is that we do take make all of the efforts we can to support children who do have long COVID to be able to return to a normal education as quickly as possible. And that's something certainly as a system that we're acutely aware of, and we'll do our best to ensure that support is there for them. There is specialist paediatric support for those who are particularly impacted by long COVID and really debilitated by it, and so that's helpful, I think, and that's provided through the hospital. But we also need to be aware that there are others who may not be completely debilitated, but it may be impacting on their lives nonetheless, and we need to ensure the support's there for them. In terms of ventilation, it's one of the critical measures you can take to reduce the risk of COVID, and largely ventilation over the course of the pandemic has involved opening a window, and we still push for keeping windows open, and that's particularly difficult at this time of year, as you can imagine, but it's really important. Alongside that, the Department for Education have provided to schools where there are particular issues, starting with specialist schools and then moving on to other schools, air filtration units, and that's where you've got schools where you can't open the windows. There are some of the more modern schools where you can't open the windows and the ventilation's poor, or where there's rooms, for example, that we've identified through using our CO monitors that have been provided, that again provide that it's impossible to get the ventilation right in that room to ensure that the level of risk is reduced. So schools can apply for those. There's a national programme that they can apply for them. There's not enough of them, there never is there? But I'm relatively confident they're being prioritised to the schools that need them the most. And if we've got schools in Calderdale who really need them, then they've been encouraged to apply, and I'd hope that they would get the support they need to ensure that the rooms are well ventilated.
Thank you, Ben. We would like to report. Sorry, Councillor Kingston.
I was just thanking Ben for the reply. Thank you.
All right. Well, I'll say thank you as well. There you go. And as I say, if you could send on that report to Lauren, that'd be great. We'll all have a look. Nobody else is indicating. So, Ben, I'm going to say thank you very much. Again, illuminating. Let's hope for the future. Yeah, a bit better, I'm afraid. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Item 8, members. The budget. Before we start, I'd just like to remind members of the process. We talk about children and young people at this board, and we then make the recommendation or share those comments that we make with Strategy and Performance Board. For some reason, I've never really understood why. And they make recommendations to the Cabinet as part of the budget consultation. As I say, I have no understanding why. If we could keep it to, members will have general comments about the budget, then they can make them at full council, not tonight. CYP only, thanks very much. Councillor Courtney or Julie, which one?
I'm here as well, Chair.
Yeah,
or Councillor Wilkinson, right?
I believe that
with more chiefs than Indians tonight.
Yeah, Councillor Wilkinson's officially still in post, and I'm shadowing and watching and learning at the moment. So
I didn't think it was fair to drop Sarah in at the deep end on the very first week. Thank you, Chair. So yeah, I mean, as you'll see from the report, it remains a challenging time for the council in terms of our budget, and we have been facing a number of pressures as a council over a number of years, not least down to the reduction in funding that we've had from central government since 2010, but also because of rising costs of social care, both adults and children's social care, which now collectively account for 70% of the council's entire budget. There's also the costs associated with the pandemic, which there's still some level of uncertainty over, and some uncertainty around what funding local authorities can expect to get over the coming years as well. So the council's had to make a lot of savings in recent years, both through the annual budgeting process, but also through the Future Council programme. And in terms of children and young people's directorate, a large proportion of what we actually spend money on is statutory services. So we're quite limited in terms of what savings we have been able to make over the years. Two big areas where we have made savings in previous years were the youth service and children's centres. And they are sort of statutory, discretionary services. But as we've already made fairly substantial savings in those areas in recent years, we did decide that to make any more savings would just not be appropriate. We've also made the decision over the years as an administration to protect and invest in early intervention and maintain the funding of children's social care more generally, because we think it's the right thing to do to protect the most vulnerable in our community, but also because not to do so would only lead to children and families experiencing further problems and, the council and its partners actually incurring bigger costs further down the line. But despite all this, I am conscious that as a directorate, we didn't make any savings during the incredibly challenging Future Council programme, where we did see a lot of cuts to other directorates. So we have had a look at what we can do as a directorate in order to compensate for some of the investment items that have been proposed within this year's budget. As I said, we ruled out any further cuts to the youth service or children's centres. And the only other real possibility that we could see as a saving was this saving in the inclusion funding that you'll see within the report. Inclusion funding used to be known as DCATCH, and it's a fund that supports Ofsted registered early years and childcare provision to be able to meet the individual needs of children and young people with special educational needs and disabilities to access early education and childcare. Now, there is a statutory duty for all local authorities to support children aged 3 to 4 in receipt of early education funding with low and emerging needs. But what we've done as an authority is actually we've funded well over and above that statutory service, as you can see in the report. And we've actually funded a lot more than what other authorities in West Yorkshire have as well. So some of what we are doing is actually discretionary. And we believe that the impact of the savings that we're proposing will be minimal. We'll still be going well over our statutory duties and offering more than any other authority in West Yorkshire. And it's only the out of school provision and wraparound care that will be affected. It's also worth noting that there is access to a discretionary 15% of the holidays, activities and food funding that central government's provided. The main criteria for that is that it's funding for children on free school meals. But for the last 2 rounds of funding, we have been granted permission from government to use some of this funding for children with special educational needs as well. So that hopefully will go some way to replacing the money that will be taken out as a result of this saving. And we are still retaining £60,000 in funding, so that if there are any gaps in provision as a result of this change, we will be able to step in and support providers in a particular geographical area where there's seen to be a problem. The only other thing that I just wanted to speak a little bit on is the cost of external placements, which continues to be the really big budget pressure in our directorate. You'll see there is some extra money going in to help meet these pressures. The problems that we have on this is by no means unique to Calderdale. This is a big national issue. And you'll have seen there was a report by the Competition and Markets Authority in October, where they outlined significant concerns about the availability of placements and the profits that private providers are making. So I think there is a real national recognition now that something needs to be done on this. We are doing a number of things locally, as you'd probably be aware, to try to mitigate these pressures, including setting up the new internal residential units, officers have regular meetings as well to sort of examine all the placements and ensure that they're suitable and we're getting as best value for money as we can. We block purchase placements with a local provider to try and again get best value for money. We've reviewed our fostering service to try and make fostering as attractive as possible and make sure we're retaining as many foster carers as possible. So, we are doing what we can. However, there's no silver bullet on this, and we know that the problem's not going to go away anytime soon, I'm afraid. So I'll stop there, and I don't know whether Julie's got anything to, or Sylvia's got anything to add. Otherwise, collectively, we'll try and answer questions.
Councillor Dacre wants to come in, Chair.
Councillor Dacre.
Yeah,
Sylvia.
Thanks very much. So I just thought it might be helpful if I just said something now before you start thinking about your recommendations. So the first thing was that when you're looking at, it's a long paper, the budget paper, and when you're looking at it, there's parts of it that don't immediately spring out as being to do with CYP and children, but actually are. So for instance, you'll see that we're raising the council tax by the maximum that we're allowed to without holding a referendum. And we're doing that because in reality, the government expects us to do that to bring us up to the level of increase in core spending power that they say we're going to have. So all councils effectively in a position where they have to raise council tax unless they're in an extremely unusual and unfortunate position for some reason. And of course, raising council tax, we realise that it has an effect on families and children. And some of those families and children are going to be in a difficult position this year. So we're really pleased that we were able to continue to protect council tax reduction scheme to protect the most vulnerable of those. We, as Councillor Wilkinson said, there's only one area of cuts for CYP this year, and there were 2 last year. But we felt it was absolutely crucial to have a 3-year budget, despite all the uncertainties that are referred to in those papers. And you'll see from the papers that despite there being an increase in funding this year, we're still in a position where we're nowhere near where we used to be 10 years ago, and we're still in 23-4 and 24-5 looking at budget deficits. So the fact that children and young people got off relatively lightly this year doesn't mean that we aren't going to have to come back and look very hard again at some of the things going on in the directorate, and that is just really, really challenging now, because as you've heard, we've looked at all the discretionary things. We're down to seeing how can we try to do statutory things more cheaply, effectively, and if you want to safeguard children, for instance, that's really difficult. So some very challenging times ahead, I think, and just finally, I think to say that Councillor Wilkinson's mentioned the issues over looked after children and their accommodation, and there are still those budget pressures going on all the time in this directorate, and we'll obviously be doing everything we can to try to keep on top of those through the budget challenge sessions through the year. But everybody, as Adam has said, has to recognise that it's not a situation that is entirely within our control. I'm sorry, I don't want to see this as propaganda. I think I've stated facts.
Thank you, Councillor Dick. I'm sure you have. Councillor Kingston.
Those are the 3 points that I wanted to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kingston.
Thank you. I was just noticing that actually most of the members on this panel are new members. So, like me, have no experience of scrutinising budget previously. I think we've only got 3 experienced members that can make recommendations that have experience of doing so previously. So I feel a little out on a limb. on this. I was just reflecting on what we've been discussing in the meeting earlier in relation to this, specifically the potential that there's an increased mental health need among young people. And I wondered, is there any room in the budget that's been recommended for increasing services to young people, specifically with regard to mental health? Which seems like a silly question, really, in the context of conversation about cuts that we're having to make and are necessary. But nevertheless, I'm going to ask that question anyway. Is there any room for that?
I think I don't know like to answer that, but we've certainly had this panel. I take a point about inexperienced members. We regularly look at what the council now called open minds, used to be called CAMS, and young children, young people's mental health. But we've been exhaustive with it. I don't know if anybody would care to comment, Julie or Adam.
We have had actually quite a significant amount of extra funding for mental health in the last couple of years, which has gone directly into schools. I don't know if Julie, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there has been significant mental health funding gone in, particularly after COVID, really dealing with some of the issues that we were talking about earlier on, Councillor Kingston. And there's lots of training there as well for, for members of staff have been able to deal with that within the school rather than having to refer out to other sources. And we do have in Calderdale an Open Minds website. I have shared, I can put the link up now for you actually, and it will show you an array of resources that are there for professionals and parents and children. And that's been funded by the CCG and the council for a long time and is quite well developed. As you just said, Councillor Raystrup, we did have a report on this. I think it was the last but one scrutiny, maybe the last scrutiny from the clinical commissioning group. But I'll put the link up so you can see what's there. But we do have additional funding, significant funding that's coming in directly into schools so they can help deal with children's emotional needs directly there in the setting. But I'll put the link up so you can see what's there. There's a whole array of resources, and young people have worked really hard on this too, about doing lots of supportive things for other students, like worry cards, if you're worried about exams or you're worried about COVID. So that, there's loads of lovely resources on there, but I'll post it up there for you now so you can see it.
Excellent.
I wouldn't say we've solved all the problems, Councillor Kingston, but we're certainly making progress. Felicity, Councillor, is it?
Hi, I just this is one of my this is my first go with the budget, so I'm one of those inexperienced councillors. So apologies if I ask questions that are other people know. I just want to sort of drill down a little bit into it, because obviously this budget proposal that we've got gives us titles and headings, but I'm not overly aware of what they are. So I was quite looking forward to you talking to us today about what that discretionary element was. And I just want to know, because what you said from your description is by cutting that, we're going to be affecting pupils with SEND needs, pupils who are students or children, I should say, sorry, teacher head on, I call them pupils, that are aged 3 to 4. It's affecting after school and wraparound care. So for me, that's saying, well, we know because of COVID that students entering reception are significantly affected in terms of their socialising and their speech and language development. We know that SEND students are nationally a massive issue in terms of the funding that's been put in and how it's been raised, as it's not adequate, and there's huge national campaigns about it. And we know that the wraparound care and the after school stuff is normally what allows parents to work, because school hours and normal hours are not hours that allow you to work easily. So I just wondered what this cut to funding actually is going to look like for a parent of a SEND student or SEND child who's aged 3 to 4. Like, what will it actually look like in terms of difference of service if we make these cuts?
Adam?
Can I come in on this, please?
Oh, Julie.
If I could, Chair. Yeah, just to explain to members a little bit more about what we're actually proposing. And we have looked across the whole of West Yorkshire to see what they do as well. And as Councillor Wilkinson said, some of this is statutory, particularly for children who are 3 and 4 year old, but not for 2-year-olds. And it would completely keep that in place and in the main place where they go to early years, you know, where they have some early years support. And just to stress to members, this is for children with low and emerging needs. For children who were really clear that, you know, there is a special educational need there, they would have the portage service, they would be getting ready in terms of some of the support that the SEN service. So this is picking up more on an early intervention and preventative way, making sure that where the child is in a mainstream setting during the day, that they will be able to get the support they need. And what this funding does, if it's required, it would put an additional member of staff in, but it also does other things like training the staff team around managing emerging needs too. We do have some resource within the council. They're called QUIZOs. They're quality and assurance people within the early years settings, and they do the training, and that training will continue, I would imagine, to most settings. But I just wanted to share with you as well some of the changes that are happening within the patterns of childcare because of COVID. And I did speak to Nikki Woods, who's our early years specialist, who does the work really on sufficiency to make sure we've got enough sufficient places. And she said the patterns are really changing within families. And she said what's happening is a lot of the pre and after school isn't being used because parents have got much more flexibility around working at home. So they know if they're working at home, they can actually take their children to school, they can log on at 9, they may do a bit of work in the evening to catch up, but we know at tea time, what's happening is parents are picking up their children, bringing them home, saying, crack on with your homework, I'm going to do a few emails, and the whole pattern and use of after school provision is changing. So what this change will do is make sure that most of the time children are in mainstream settings, so that's your Monday to Friday, your 9 to 5. What it's going to do is for those wrap round at the end of each end of the day would not get the inclusion funding in the way that they do now, and the holiday schemes wouldn't either. What we have done with the budget is maintain some of it, is actually make a saving proposed of 100k, but actually maintain some budgets to make sure that if you had an area, as Councillor Wilkinson said, didn't have enough provision in terms of wraparound or holiday provision, that we could give them that additional funding and support to make sure it was there. But I think family patterns are changing. People are doing different things with their working day, and I don't think there's as much wraparound as there was before. Thanks, Chair.
So what we're saying is that a parent that may have access to funded wraparound care now might not have access to it in the new.
No, what we're saying is this isn't anything to do with the funding generally for wraparound or holiday provision. This is it's a top up. Think of it as a top up payment. So that if you had a number of children with emerging or low needs in your holiday setting or your wraparound care, you could say to the council, you could apply for a bit of top-up funding. So it doesn't affect the family's ability at all to access holiday or wraparound care in the way that it would have done before. This is just an additional top-up that they would have applied to the council for. What we're saying is we want to make sure that top-up continues for 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. We want to make sure that's in their mainstream setting where they are every single day for all of the day, because that's the important place where they're going to get their language development, where they're going to meet other children. You know, yes, holiday provision is important, but in terms of that top up, that's where the saving will come from.
And we're not going to get children turned away from wraparound care because they haven't got the funding for the additional staff to support the needs of those students. That's not going to happen if we cut this funding.
Well, the patterns of wraparound care are changing. Parents are using it less and less, but if we had a need for wraparound provision and the inclusion funding was an element of that, and there wasn't sufficient in an area, we'd be able to tap into that proposed budget
15%
that we're going to keep back, but also the half funding the holiday and food funding that Councillor Wilkinson mentioned.
I'd be careful with the working from home situation though, because while we may have seen that change over the last 2 years, we're going to go back to not working from home maybe quite so much. So it's just
keeping an eye on
just
family
something to think
patterns.
about maybe. Yeah. And then my last thing is just because when I'm looking at that budget, obviously there's lots of headings like premises related, employee related, transport related. How would I find out what that actually meant in more detail? And this is really just because to me, you're saying that there's this much money on employee related, but I don't know what that means.
Nigel Broadbent.
Just ask him and he can break it down in more detail.
Absolutely. Send him an email.
I feel like everyone's told me in the last couple of weeks just to email Nigel Broadbent. I feel like he's probably getting quite a lot of emails at the minute. But
He's retiring soon. Give him out. He's retiring soon. Give him out time. So the answer to the question you raised, Felicity, was what we're trying to do is what we're exactly saying is that demand's decreasing so we can save a bit of money. Would that sum it up, Julie, in one word? Yes or no?
No. No, I think the proposal is trying to have the least effect that we can on families while making a modest saving, I would say. The council is delivering a number of discretionary services using the inclusion funding, and it's bringing us more in line with West Yorkshire. So no, I wouldn't say that. I would just say it's trying to make a small reduction and have the least effect on families.
All right, thank you. I just have one point. We often talk, or Julie's just talked about looking around West Yorkshire at what they do and taking examples of what they do. I understand that Bradford Council offer domestic rate relief for their care leavers. If we're going to try to take the best out of what other councils do, have we thought about that?
Yes, we have. We've looked at this a couple of times actually, and Councillor Courtney and Councillor Wilkinson raised this with me last week and actually shared with me. I think Bradford have just put some publicity out about what they're doing for care leavers. So I have sent it to finance and I have got the figures broken down. I'm actually meeting with Councillor Courtney and Councillor Wilkinson to share that with them tomorrow. So yes, we have, Chair. It's a topic of discussion at the moment.
Well, I think I'll let Sarah off that one. Anyway, not to worry.
We'd have to get it past Councillor Dacre though, which wouldn't be easy.
Oh, we've got a big council meeting to discuss it, haven't we? So, members, do we want to make any recommendations to strategy and performance? Or are we happy that we've made our peace with Councillors Dacre, Wilkinson and Courtney tonight?
Yeah.
I think if members have issues, well, I don't see any recommendations I want to make other than the one about rate relief, which I think should be looked at, but I can raise that in another forum. And if something's going on, then that's good enough. So I'm going to say that we don't really want to make any recommendations to strategy and performance. We've looked at this budget and I wouldn't say we were happy, but I wouldn't say we were unhappy either. Any objections to that, members? I don't know why strategy and performance want to talk to us anyway.
Councillor Dacre would like to come in, please, Chair.
Councillor Dacre.
I was just going to say, when you say you can't say you're happy about it, I don't think any of us are happy about it. And that's just where we are, I'm afraid.
Yeah, perhaps happy is not the right word. But anyway, I'll take on board what you're saying, Councillor Dacre. Thank you for coming. All the cabinet members and deputy cabinet members that are here this evening. Item 9, work programme members. We're nearly finished. Oh, Councillor Riveron.
Yes, Chair, just something I'd like to have included on the work programme. We've had a number of times about increased numbers of places in SEND special schools. There was an item in Cabinet on Monday about a possible new SEND school, and at the same time we've got a national review of SEND provision. Could I ask that we have perhaps a detailed item on this added to the work programme, please?
Yes, you can. It's a very short time before our meeting in February, but could we put that in the March meeting? Would Julie have any objections?
My view is I'd rather we did it properly rather than quickly, so March should be fine, yes.
Yeah, I don't think we'll have the national review report in by then. They have said by the end of March, but it looks like, again, there's a bit of slippage. It has slipped a couple of times already. But it'd be good maybe to start that conversation so we can understand what the position is. You've had the specialist inclusion report around our specialist teaching provision, and we're looking at a number of areas and the high needs funding with Leslie. So it'd be good to bring you up to speed. Then we can see what the National SEN review brings to us. I think it's going to recommend that you have less special schools and more mainstream schools are inclusive. So it'd be really good to see what that's recommending as well. But we could take it a step at a time if that's what you'd like to do and start that conversation.
Well, yes, I'd like to suggest we have a report in March to start that conversation, please.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Foster-Dott.
Thanks, Chair. It's not really something for inclusion on the work programme, more a suggestion of a vote of thanks. A note from Julie's email from a few days ago that Leslie Boyer is due to retire fairly soon. And I think as a board, we should offer our very best thanks to her for all the sterling work she has done throughout over the years. You know, I mean, if there's a meeting before, I'm not quite sure when she's due to retire. I'm presuming it's not sort of desperately imminent. It doesn't tend to be with very senior members of staff. But if there is an opportunity to invite Leslie along so we can thank her properly before she retires, then that would be good, I think.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just to mention that because of Councillor Courtney's change in role, she's not going to be participating in the food work as a scrutiny member, and Councillor Tremaine has, I think, volunteered is the right word, to take a lead on that work. So I think we need to mention that under the work.
I think that's right as well, Mike. Thank you, Diana. That's excellent.
Possibly being volunteered might have been more accurate, but.
Well, arm twisted. Oh, so with time before Leslie retires, from what Julie's notes, she'll be at Scrutiny before then. It'd be nice to do it in person, but obviously we agree with what the doctor says. Members, it's been a really long one tonight. I'm very sorry, but when the health safeguarding report comes, there's nothing you can do but take a long time.